Hello and welcome to the Animation Communication Podcast, for your source of discussion about animation, film, fandom, and more. So please join our host, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, or KP, and Lyle Convoy, or Lyle Manbad.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Animation Communication with just me, not Lyo, because Lyo's a busy guy. So with me today I have Joe, who does Joe things. Hi Joe, who are you? Tell me about your internet, the things you do on the internet generally.
Hey, yes. So I'm Joseph Holmes, Joseph as in the Bible and Holmes as in Sherlock. I am a film critic and podcast host, film critic for Religion Unplugged and podcast host of The Overthinkers, where we talk about all sorts of fun things, culture, art, faith, and just it's all about having fun thinking deeply. And I'm really excited here to talk to my friend Rachel. It's been a minute.
Yeah, tell the audience what shows you've been on in the past in case they don't remember or they're new to the program and they want to get used to you in the context of me.
Yeah, so we were just talking before the episode. I was on in like the really early days. So I was on one of your ones where you were, I don't remember the episode titles, but where we were talking about your history with John Delancey, and then the one we were talking about your very difficult history with internet bullying. So yeah, I was on those in the early days use my star power to help get you started on the podcast space, clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, specifically he's referring to the John Delancey one is called Should We Meet Our Heroes?
Yeah, that's right.
And then the other one is Fandom versus Religion, I believe.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we were doing the comparison of how the crazy stuff that fans can do and the crazy stuff that religious people can do and how they're kind of related psychologically and such.
Right. It's been a minute, but this episode is kind of related back to that. And also we needed new episodes and we needed people to come on that are not toxic. So Joe happens to live in Manhattan, which is a city where people are from a lot of different cultures are kind of used to.
Yeah, we're used to running into each other and
being civil.
Yes, civil and friendly.
Right.
Despite differences.
So I thought that would be an interesting conversation to have as far as just kind of approaching those spaces, because when dealing with trolls, I guess in my experience, but in the general vernacular of the word, I suppose, if that's what we want to call it, trolls will kind of deflect using biblical quotes and they'll just kind of have toxic tendencies by pushing their beliefs on other people. It's happened to me a lot where, if I'm pretty candid and open about my trauma because most people were there to see it. It's not something that was a private event, unfortunately. So I'm pretty open if people bring it up in like casual conversation. And I've been told more than I would like to about Jesus and how I should read about Jesus. And as a Jewish person, I am culturally Jewish, but I'm not really particularly practicing as they say in Jewish culture. It's just if you're practicing or not. So I'm kind of like on the fence about everything. Agnostic would be the word, because I think that's just kind of a general mindset. I mean, Joe knows more about religion in general, but that's a general mindset that people with a lot of harsh experience sometimes
absolutely
can develop. So but it's always been a thing where even before this, when I was a kid and teenager and even in college, people would be like, hey, would you like a free Bible? And I'm just like, no, I'm Jewish and I'm not really interested in your Jesus right now, thank you, sir. So
I'm happy with my religion. I don't need to change to your plan. I know your plan is $10.99 and allows me to eat beef, but I'm good with mine for now, thanks.
So I thought this would be an interesting conversation to have because I am pretty, I know general Christian beats as far as the story of Jesus, but Joe and I always joke that my knowledge of the Jesus story was like that episode of Rick and Morty. The story Lord comes back episode, but they do like a subplot of the Jesus plot, and I'm just like, that's all I know. why are there two Marys? There's Mary Magdalene and there's another Mary, but Mary's a virgin, but she's not a virgin because she was married before she had Jesus. But I don't know how any of this works. But I've also studied in college. I studied the Renaissance. I had a whole course about Renaissance art and history and how the interesting relationships between the artists and the church, and how people would use those relationships to kind of build themselves to make sure they got into heaven, because it seemed like a very much more transactional, like if you do good thing you get a heaven point, if you don't do if you do bad thing you don't get a heaven point. So historically the churches had the power, so that's the interesting relationship, but people also don't understand that that does technically count as fan art. The Sistine Chapel is technically fan art. But yeah, I'll open the floor to you, Joe. So what is your general experience with being Christian, and then what is your experiences when you deal with kind of not necessarily Christian specifically, but toxic people that kind of push their beliefs? Or we can dance around a little bit about
Sure.
the general political beliefs too, but it's
Sure, yeah.
because you live in a place where that stuff doesn't fly as easily as if you're the only Jewish person in town or whatever. So
Sure. Yeah, I mean, every place has their political and cultural baseline taboos, and so New York is no different. It happens to go one way where those other places go another. But yeah, I grew up, like, if you want to talk about like how Christian, like, you grow up experiences.
Christian are you?
How Christian are you?
Do you have your Christian
Exactly.
do you have your Christian black belt yet? There you go. I said it.
I like to think that I'm somewhere in the green belt range, but regardless, I was raised the son of two ordained ministers. So like my mom and dad both met at seminary, bonding over their love of Jesus and their mutual suffering. And then they got married, and they had, me and my sister, and I grew up, and and I know this is going to definitely expose me, but I grew up, some of my most happy memories are of sitting at the dinner table with my whole family and just talking about how theology and God connect to whatever movie that we watched as a family. So again, just
I never think about that stuff because I like to think about things like from a general perspective. So that's just more of a line of how Joe's kind of, own mental psychologically was molded in the shadows.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
Well, that's the thing is, from a secular perspective, what you want to think about is, okay, how does this relate to life and existence and stuff like that? And of course, from the Christian perspective, at the bottom of all existence is God. And so the getting kind of formed to think in that way is definitely, again, I can't hide it. Like, that's what my upbringing was. And if you listen to my podcast, like, again, it's a joke at this point, like almost every episode, comes back down to, and the ultimate, answer at the bottom of all these questions is God, is Jesus. And so, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, definitely check out the Overthinkers podcast.
I wonder when I'm going to be on that podcast, Joe. Like,
yes, I don't know, sometime we'll talk about it. But in any case, so yeah, that's definitely my growing up. I grew up, again, so again, son of a preacher. My dad was more the practicing, and my mom did more of the taking care of my sister and myself. But my dad, yeah, so like son of a preacher, I was ensconced. Most of my best friends growing up were people I met at church, particularly since I was homeschooled. So definitely full in that community. And then I went to a Christian college in New York City. And of course, like, part of the reasons I chose a Christian college in New York City is because I wanted, since it was like my first big break away from my family, I wanted a place that would not be a total culture shock. But I also wanted to be in New York City because I didn't want to be somewhere where I was just in another bubble.
Yeah, you were secretly Spider-Man.
Exactly. Yes. Don't, like, I didn't think.
Did I expose you on a podcast?
I wasn't hoping that this would be I wasn't hoping this would be my way of like coming out to everyone as a superhero. But I guess everybody's Spider-Man now.
Someone called the Daily Bugle, man. We got the exclusive scoop right here.
It's fine. Everybody's Spider-Man now, so it's not a big deal. So yeah. Anyway. And yeah, I've gotten a chance to, as I've gotten a chance both growing up in, a Christian family, in Christian communities, and then being in New York City and being in a lot of secular communities, I've gotten a chance to see different kinds of ways of being Christian and different kinds of ways of being non-Christian and dealing with Christianity. I mean, my first year at King's is when I met Rachel. We had a mutual friend who also went to the King's College, and she introduced us, and then we were friends ever since. And so I've, and there's definitely like, different types of Christians. Like there's the Christians who are like super into their faith and really just want everyone to be Christian and want, their big dream in life is to be part of God's project of bringing the kingdom of God on earth which is a way of a kingdom of justice and peace and freedom and all that stuff, at least as we understand it. And then there's Christians who are like, this is a part of my identity, but my project is really about self-discovery and in a more secular kind of sense.
Right.
And there's non-Christians who are like, I really hate this religion stuff. I don't want anything to do with it. And then there are people who are just like, it's fine, whatever, if that's good for you. But like, again, I'm good kind of thing. Like, it's like being religious, like being vegan or something,
Right. And I imagine the second option, the first option you mentioned, as far as making it their project to have heaven on earth, can lead to some problematic tendencies without really kind of bringing up the N-word, not that N-word, the fascist N-word.
Gotcha. Yes. Yeah. So that's interesting, because the two kinds of Christians who like make being Christian a big part of their personality. And what I think is interesting about that, so like the two things, so when I'm looking at a toxic Christian, what I find certain things in common. So yeah, when you talk about the toxic Christian that says, oh, I'm going to try to mold somebody into my image or try to force them to engage in behaviors that, I'm gonna troll people, like you said, like you're describing people who troll people and who do hate speech, engage in mean, harassing, bullying behavior. Basically, people who engage in bullying behavior and then saying, but I can do this because God said that this is how you should behave.
No.
Typically, what I find is they tend to have certain things in common. And they typically have the things in common that are with like most toxic people in general. And what I understand the consensus of what toxic person is, generally speaking, is... Oh
yeah, I was going to even touch on that. Like, what is your definition of a toxic person, just so we're on the same page?
Yeah.
Because my definition of the toxic person is basically someone who is what feels like they are personally without fault. And if they maybe make a decision that is unethical or, not even without the consent of another party, they get defensive, they refuse to take responsibility, they make it someone else's problem. And usually those people have a tendency, like they can't ever view themselves in a negative light. So they have to kind of, I don't want to say the word gaslight because that's kind of a slight exaggeration, but they have like they're like, I am a good person. Like they're so self-conscious and so afraid to admit that they made a mistake that they gravitate that to, oh, if I say I made a mistake or even lied, even if it's a white lie, then it's suddenly I'm a bad person. They can't really handle that reality. So they make it everyone else's problem, whether it be on the internet or not. And I try my best dealing with a lot of the situations I've been dealing with lately to just lay out the evidence and say, hey, here's the evidence. This is the objective discussion of whatever the thing is. Feel free to make your own conclusions. Like I'm not really there to convince anyone. I'm just saying, hey, this is what we had to deal with. Like in like an example in regards to the Discord server, because we have to put out safety reports on people that are not doing good things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think those are all great. I would say I define a toxic person as somebody who tries to get what they want by engaging in behavior that's harmful to themselves and others.
Yeah.
And as you said, refuses to take responsibility for those distorted desires and behaviors and won't work on themselves to improve them. Mm-hmm. That's largely how I define a toxic person. Then additionally, if I'm putting a Christian, sort of the Christian version of that, to me, the Christian version of that, what I've observed is that a toxic Christian is somebody who uses their Christianity to empower them to engage in behavior, try to get what they want in a way that harms themselves and harms others and won't take responsibility for that. So that's that's typically what I find is with toxic Christianity is they, just like all of us, they have things that they want and they decide that they're going to use, and they haven't done the inventory to say, is the stuff I want actually good for me and good for other people? Or is the way I'm going about it a way that could be harmful to me or harmful to other people? And maybe I should work on that. And said, no, I'm just going to not take inventory on myself and instead just use whatever I can find in the Bible to whack other people as a weapon to get what I want.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I see a healthy Christian as somebody who engages with their faith as primarily a project to grow in themselves, to become a more healthy person so that they only want things that are good for themselves and good for others. And they want to go about that in the right way. And they take responsibility to be transformed in that way.
And yeah, that's always kind of the construct is for in the Jewish faith, we have to kind of lead by example. We don't have someone who's saying like, we don't have the Jesus figure who's just saying, oh, I love everyone, because we, like, the historical documents paint a God who, you know, was kind of he didn't tolerate anyone's crap. And the biggest, and
you follow me, you're on this side of the street that's not going to collapse. If you're not with me, then I'm gonna just this side of the street is gonna fall and just, you know, eat you up, swallow you up. Yeah,
I'll just send a flood. I'll just make you guys drink the golden calf. It's fine. No skin off my bone. So that's kind of the general Old Testament God. So Jewish people usually kind of have a general sense, in my experience, a more general kind of like, hey, you know, maybe like that wasn't the best plan. Like they'll more be open to kind of question that stuff on hindsight versus just kind of accept it factually, if that makes sense.
I can see that.
So, and that's kind of the famous rabbis of the Jewish, you know, religion will kind of, I don't know if we've discussed this directly or on this podcast specifically, but they'll have famous interpretations where they'll like go through the Torah, which is the Jewish version of the Old Testament, essentially, plus some, it's just Old Testament. Yeah. And they'll leave their own interpretations based on how they view, you know, their analysis on specific religious events. And, you know, there's multiple different interpretations, and those are all kind of valid and known. And if, like, you know, that's why, you know, general Jewish educators will quote different rabbis regarding different things, depending on whatever interpretation sits with people the best, because, you know, that was always a thing with Passover. And just so everyone knows, that is something that is heavily, or not heavily, but just kind of lightheartedly discussed as far as God killing the firstborns, as far as the Passover story about how, hey, those are innocent children as well. You know, like it was kind of a means to an end, but still it was innocent parties. That wasn't kind of totally PC there, God. So, you know, I don't know where I was going with this, but that's the general vibe is that, you know, in the Jewish experience, education is very valued. So it's dependent on the individual.
That's why you kick all of our butts in, you know, in society.
Hey, that's still racist, but it's positive racism. How dare you on my own podcast?
But it's statistically accurate.
Yeah, and Jewish people aren't necessarily smarter, but that's just a cultural thing.
No, yeah. It's not biological. It's not racial. It's just you guys have, you know, culturally do education better.
There's more of an emphasis on that. So like, you know, it was never in my growing up, it was never a question of whether I was going to go to college. I was always going to go to college. And before I knew it, I graduated from college. And then I got continuing education at art school because, you know, I needed, you know, it was just easier for me to learn in a school setting. It still is. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, you bring up an interesting point. And this is maybe slightly off topic, but it's a really interesting point you point out in terms of the differences in sort of Jewish and Christian communities, at least the American ones that we have most experience in, is that because as Christians, we have Jesus, as Yershel pointed out, and we consider to be the definitive interpreter of the Old Testament or the Torah. So he does a lot of interpreting. He's like, what does this is the right way to look at this? We have there's a lot less debate about how to interpret it and a lot more, well, look at Jesus and say, how would he interpret it and how is he to interpret it? That's a lot more where the conversation goes. Now, there are still lots of different interpretations. Like, again, there's the conservative versus liberal sort of spectrum on it, but it's still always going back to Jesus. Well, how would he have us interpret it? And it's interesting demographically, it tends to be that the communities that interpret it in more, let's say, a more liberal way, and I mean theologically liberal here, where it's like, oh, okay, and when we're religion, we're talking about theologically conservative liberal, we mean more like literal interpretation versus metaphorical interpretations. Conservative tends to be more literal interpretation, and liberal tends to be more.
Yeah, this is the woke episode of the animation communication podcast. So we're trying to just do generalizations as far as,
just for people who are not super versed in all of these conversations, so you have some of the terminology.
I promise we'll link this back to fandom near the end, but
but yeah, so it's
I'm not a Christian, so I don't know the Christian that
jargon,
is why Joe is here. He can talk, he can translate to Christian the Christian things. But
I'll also say another thing is that I want to say, just because I do want us to be able to get there, and I'll say is there's another way. Well, I'll say a couple things. One is that the interesting thing is that I would always ask somebody if you're dealing with a troll online who starts throwing Bible verses at you. One thing I would suggest you do as an interesting, at least sociological experiment, is ask them how many times a month they go to church, because there are a really interesting collection of studies that have come out. Well, they've been out for a long time, but they've only started to get publicized recently, about how typically that the men in America who are least likely to engage in things traditionally associated with toxic masculinity, such as violence, such as low emotional intelligence and emotional acceptance, all those things. The men who are least likely to engage in toxic masculinity symptoms or behaviors.
Or have the definitional term of incel, which is basically someone who makes the fact that they, I don't want to go into, let's not define incel, but you can Google it anyway, but continue.
So the least likely to engage in those, have those symptoms or engage in those behaviors, are evangelical Christian men who go to church more than or 3 times a month or more. And the ones who are most likely to have symptoms of toxic masculinity are the evangelical Christian men who go to church less than 3 times a month. And so the upshot of that is you have people who have just enough religion to, again, use it as a weapon to get things they want, but not enough religion that it's actually transforming them. Like, they haven't listened to Jesus' words where he says, hey, if you have power and authority over other people, you have to use it in order to benefit them, not to exploit them. And so that's why, again, I would love this to be a meme online. If people start using a Bible verse to bash people, it's like, just have all the comments be, how many times a month do you go to church? Mm-hmm. Because in that case, you're talking about people who are using it as an identity without actually engaging in the practices. Right. Which is something that Jews actually, again, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the practices are a lot more emphasized as being part of the identity, as sometimes it is in the Christian community.
Right. It's very subjective, especially in Reformed communities, as far as, because as like in my experience, which we talked about on your job podcast.
Religion Unplugged podcast.
So I was on that like a month ago, if you want to look it up, if you care. But in my experience, a lot of the Reformed Jewish communities, with people with families specifically, would start getting involved once they started to have a family of their own. But, would kind of fall out of it as their children got older. So it wasn't really about participating as an individual, but also participating, again, this is individual by individual, but I'm sure there's stats to support this, put it that way, that they get involved as far as the educational aspects of their children, and once their children grow up, then they kind of like, it's important for them to expose their children to Jewish faith and the Jewish customs, but that's not really to say like what the children want. So it's fine when you're a child and you're doing fun things around the holidays, and but as you grow up, you're just like, okay, I'm not really like, again, not to touch too much of my experience, but like I kind of feel isolated with these people that I don't really know in any other context. Maybe I need to have a say in my Jewish education or lack of there, or whatever. Like after you get like like 10 even or
Mhm.
8, then you kind of like, okay, I know all the holidays, I know the customs, I'm good, I got it. So
Yeah, so on the flip side, like I was saying, like, the one thing that the Jewish communities tend to do really well is the practices and the communal aspect of it.
right.
But what often is lost in your experience is the individual aspect of it. It's like, oh, I believe this and I want to make this an important part of my individual identity. Whereas in Christianity in America, there tends to be a sort of the opposite sort of problem where community is a little bit lacking and the practices are a little bit lacking, but people really take it on as an individual identity.
Right. And kind of what I've experienced too is they just kind of make it their mission to educate other people about Jesus, whether when it's not their place, frankly, and it's not the space to do so.
Sure.
And that's kind of always been something that rubs me the wrong way, because like when we were kids, we lived next to a Mormon family and they would send missionaries to our door and we had to politely say, hey.
We don't claim the Mormons, by the way, just to let you know. The Christians are like, they're, I mean, this is, and I know Mormons. I love you guys, but there is this, and you know this if you're a Mormon. There is this relation between Christians and Mormons, where it's like Mormons like we're just like them, and the Christians like no, you're not. They do not sit with us. So anyway, but that's just as an aside. Go ahead.
Yeah, but like in my experience, the Mormons, generally speaking, have a literal read on the Bible, and so the relationship I had with the neighbors, or from my experience, because again I was a child, is they were very convinced that we were going to hell, and they were trying to save our souls by sending missionaries to our house multiple times to save our souls. And my mom had to eventually say, hey, please stop doing this, we're good. So it's just kind of and I think that's more like they seem like they were
Well-meaning,
but it's just because we didn't live in an area that was highly populated with Jewish people, that they were just like, oh, we have Jewish neighbors. Whoa, I thought everyone believed in Jesus. Whoa. And I'm just like,
yeah, so that's the other side of it. Yeah, so the most toxic people are the people I described earlier, but there is another way of sort of being toxic, if you want to call it that, as a Christian, and that is that you're well-meaning. It's like you really you love Jesus and you believe that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and because of that, you really want to save these other people who are lost without him. And it's kind of like, again, I live in New York. It's kind of like in New York, if you tell people that you're not going to therapy and everybody is just like, guy, you have to go to therapy. You have so many things screwed up about you that you don't understand and don't know about. And if you just went to therapy, then things would get better for you and you would stop being so toxic. And then there are people, again, like even if you're friends with them, like every time you talk to them, they're going to bring up, you should go to therapy. And again, I'm a pro therapy guy, but it's like, I'm a pro therapy guy. Like I go to therapy myself, and on my podcast, we talk about the benefits of therapy all the time, but it is that thing where it's like if you are convinced of somebody's being self-destructive and you care about them, you do want to, and you know what it is that's actually going to cure, maybe not all, but many of their problems. You can be really overzealous about making sure they get that help that you believe they need. The problem is, of course, as anybody knows, being that kind of person to convince somebody to do that doesn't work.
Right. And when you say that, I'm just like, oh no, because I said go to therapy as like a meme at this point. So, without, having that context, but, in my experience, especially in the online spaces, people have, whether it be autism, whatever, they don't have, again, I don't say that dismissively. I just say that as a matter of fact, they just don't have the social experience. Autism might be a factor, experience might be a factor, just a social community where they feel comfortable might be a factor. All those things might be factors,
right?
And they just need someone to politely point those whatever traits that I notice off the bat, out, so they can work through them in a positive, healthy way. But I understand therapy costs money. And I'll just put this out there, parents, if you think your kids need therapy, if the kids say, hey, mom and dad, I'd like therapy, please pay for the therapy. That's like your job as a parent, especially if your child is under 18, because they are trying to be mentally healthy and prepared. That is an obligation you have. Like, my mom's a therapist, like, and every time, it becomes the problem of the child to pay for the therapy, then the want to do the therapy is already kind of dismissed because now they feel financial obligation to pay for it, and it becomes messy. So I wasn't gonna curse, but I'll curse a little bit on this episode. So note
Go
to
for it.
editor. Yeah, but that's just kind of my general MO as far as, I naturally curse, so I don't really care. And Joe knows this.
Yeah.
At this point, I feel like.
I mean, you're going to hell anyway, so it's fine.
And I give you a platform to talk about your Christianity. Jesus Christ.
And there you go, taking the Lord's name in vain again. In any case, no, but that's the point, is that, you really do you use your platform in a very positive way. But a lot of times people don't always know the line between leveraging the benefits that I have, the knowledge I know, when I seeing somebody being self-destructive or other destructive. How do I treat them in such a way so that I can actually benefit them and share with them and encourage them to do something that's going to benefit them without doing it in such a way that I'm being a jerk? And that's a hard line for a lot of people to know. And I would say this, again, I don't know that line. Again, it's for a lot of the Christians I know, they go on to one side or another. They're like, okay, every interaction I have with this person is going to be me trying to convince them to go to church or go to therapy or whatever. And then the other side, it's, I don't want to bring anything up at all because I'm afraid of being that kind of Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'm going to ask you this.
Yeah.
What is the ratio for you of somebody being your friend, being a relationship with you, and if they really feel like, they have something that you have a wrong way of thinking about something that they want to convince you of, what is the right way for them to try to convince you of that without being a jerk or being toxic?
Well, I have a couple of answers to that. The general way is using I feel statements and not forcing issues. So I feel like, so generally speaking, this is what therapists, because again, I've been through a lot of my own therapy for my trauma. Using I feel statements, it doesn't really, it validates your emotions without making an absolute statement, generally speaking, again. So like saying I feel attacked versus, or I feel that you hurt my feelings, it kind of gives room for the other party to be like, I validate your feelings, but I feel this way. And then you can get closer to whatever the heart of the issue is. Instead of, and also just as a note, not trying to go into situations with being emotional yourself if you can help it. I understand arguments happen, but taking some space, taking a walk, dealing with hard topics when you feel like you have the spoons, as the kids say, which is,
oh my gosh, that's a whole phrase I never heard before. Oh,
I don't know if you're being sarcastic or
no,
not.
I have not. No. Oh my gosh. I'm old.
Oh, okay. Well, so the spoon, you can Google it later, Joe, and for people listening, but basically spoons is a read on emotional energy. So you have like 3 spoons, and if you use a spoon to do errands, do your laundry, whatever, then you say you have like you're out of spoons, and or you're out of emotional energy, and that just means like, hey, you're not trying to disengage in whatever conversation. Just say, hey, I don't have any spoons right now. We can talk about this at a later time.
Oh, that's
so that
fascinating.
That way you're just not saying something without dismissing the other party.
It's just another way of saying my emotional battery is depleted. Yes. Okay. Right. That's great.
I'm surprised. I'm really surprised, but that's something I learned about because now I have a disability. Not in a way that's dismissive, but it's just another beautiful part about being me. But I'm pretty at peace with it at this point. Sure. But it's just another, the PTSD doesn't really go away. It just kind of it just gets easier living with, and it didn't like start curbing up like with in and out of intense therapy, and relatively recently in the span of the 7 years I've had it. It's great being me. But anyway, that's something I learned in that context, but I've I know it's used in autistic spaces as
Sure.
well. So, just Google like spoon theory is what the Google term is, or
Gotcha.
YouTube stuff, and there's videos about that.
You learn
But
something new every day.
even Joe can be taught. But and if people don't understand spoon theory, then you can just like Google that and send them a video or something like that. There's multiple videos at this point. But so spoon theory is also a good one. But using to be back on track, using the I feel statements is just a general therapy term that can get your emotions read without really insulting people.
Sure.
And I've been on the other end where people just insult me, and I'm just like, hey, you need to stop insulting me. And just like, well, that's just how I feel. And I'm just like, that might be true, but there's never really a cause for insults. So you just take a breath and say, I feel this way based on how I feel you handled this situation. And I always try to lead with kindness until people start patronizing me,
Sure.
which happens a lot because for me specifically, people watch my videos and they read me as they don't understand that, how I present in a video, just like any, standard comedian at a show, they over exaggerate their personality for the sake of
entertainment value. Yeah.
And yeah, so it's still me. I purposely try to poke fun at myself to show for the sake of the show. But they don't understand all the work I do on the back end. They don't understand what all the work other people do on the back end. They don't understand that this stuff just doesn't appear in their feed by magic. They don't know how the production process works, specifically relating to my content or any content, how movies are made, who knows. So, their read is, oh, she's nice, but she's unintelligible. And then they start patronizing me based on whatever they feel. Like I'm dealing with a situation where someone had a vision for this happens a lot, where someone had a vision about using my channel, my assets, and my brand to promote whatever project that they felt they wanted because I have the numbers and I'm not uploading videos right now anyway, so I might as well. And they don't really say, hey, that's I'm not just an asset for your thing. You're taking my kindness, which is advice or feedback or something, and you're kind of saying, okay, well, we can work together. And I'm just like, I don't know you. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you do. Like, I'm not going to risk my energy at this point because it's just more well-defined and not as high as it had been before. Working with someone where I don't know their background, I don't know why they want to do this, and it's happened a lot where people view me as an asset to meet the ends of their needs versus just me as a person first.
Yeah, you're a means rather than an end.
Yeah, and it's disgusting, and I can see it a mile and a half away for those playing at home. And that happens a lot in the fan server. Well, meaning people generally speak, sometimes, I mean, it's a minority to be fair, but they will go on the fan server not to interact with the fan server in the community. And we've worked hard, having social nights every night at this point, and doing a lot of different fun things, but they don't really care about that because they want to use the fan server to interact with me, to try to network with me directly because I'm active in there. And I'm just like, hey, politely, and I get DMs and I'm like, hey, politely, I don't really know you. If you have a problem, you can go to the moderators. That's what they're there for. I don't really understand why this isn't really my job to deal with your personal baggage, essentially.
No, totally.
For someone I don't know, just in my experience. So I guess to loop it back, therapy is good, and therapy is a way that those behaviors can be pointed out in a productive environment. And the other thing too is because especially in autistic circles, and especially with all of that information being a lot for the older generation, sometimes what you can do if you go to therapy, you could have group sessions where a therapist will sit down with you and your parent or your guardian or whatever and have a conversation based on what your concerns are. And from my experience, those help because they validate your feelings by another adult. So your parent can't say, oh, well, that's Jimmy's opinion, and just like the therapist is like, well, that might be Jimmy's opinion, but you're not really answering the question, are you, Karen? I just threw out Karen for funsies. I couldn't
all the
help
Karens,
myself.
all the Karens in the servers being, I want to talk to your manager.
Yeah, it's my brand, damn it. I can do what I want. But
no, yeah, so I mean, I like that you said a lot of really good things there. I think that I've experienced the same thing, both with therapy and with church. Again, I can throw out a whole bunch of stats showing how church is really good for your mental health. even better in
Mhm.
many ways than therapy for your mental health, if you can believe it or not. And I talked about the statistic earlier. It's like the men who are the least toxic are not the ones who are going to therapy. They're the ones going to church. And
Well,
and going
hopefully
to
they're doing both.
yes, I promote both. I promote both. But like, as a Christian, I'm, again, there's all those aspects of it, but the Christian, I was like, man, having a relationship with Jesus and having a relationship with the King of the God of the universe, it's a loving relationship, would be so good for you. And I think about all my friends who are not Christians. I feel like that all the time. And so I definitely struggle with, I love you and I want what's best for you. And I know that this would be best for you, but how do I love you without being obnoxious in that way about it? Just like a person who's like, okay, how do I love you even though I know therapy would be good for you without constantly being a jerk about you needing to go to therapy? And again, one of the things that I try to do, and you can tell me, Rachel, and as you've mentioned this, Rachel, is that it's always coming down to the person is an end and not a means. The relationship is what's important, not getting this person on your team. It's like, look, I love Rachel because she's Rachel and I love being friends with her for its own sake. And yes, because I think that being a Christian would be best for her, that is something that I, poke at her from time to time and we have those discussions. But if she doesn't, that's okay, because what matters is the relationship first and foremost.
Mhm.
And that's where all of that's where all of it comes from. And I feel like for a lot of people, this is also the other thing that you mentioned in your conversations, which again I try to do a lot, and I really, that makes a lot of sense to me, is sort of earning the right to give advice that a lot of people don't do. Again, online with a stranger you don't know is not the place to convince people that they need to do what you think they should do. It takes a person, because everybody has an opinion about how you should live your life. It takes actually walking with somebody and watching someone for a long period of time to say, oh, this person actually has credibility with me, to if they give me advice, I might actually listen to it. Right. And so, it takes, a lot of credibility to do that. So that's another thing I try is like, look, and John Gottman is from the Gottman Institute. What I think he said also is you have to have 5 positive interactions for 1 negative interaction. And so it's like, again, majority of any relationship you have with somebody has to be, this person is, I love them because they're a person. And if I want to help them in some additional way to be the best version of themselves because I care about them, then that's, unless you're actually in a real life or death intervention, that's a minority of your interaction.
I guess it's helpful being a Jewish person sometimes in these online spaces, because I've just been so conditioned, and I'm sure this will match a lot of people's other experiences, but I've just been so conditioned to even before I started making content, before I became I Love Kim Possible a Lot TM, just so disillusioned by the people who try to use religion as a talking point to get to me without even knowing me.
Yeah.
And even it didn't really happen a lot during the actual trauma where people were saying, hey, you need Jesus, unless I'm like in a sarcastic way that I don't remember, which is whatever. But it's usually a projection, because what's happening in the online spaces is consequences don't really equate actions until a higher authority sees them. So from my understanding, police don't really view online as important when they should. There's not really a dedicated cybersecurity. We just as a society haven't caught up to that at this point. So there's predators who facade as real nice guy Joe, and they, not to use you Joe, but like real nice guy Tom or whatever, and they use that to lure victims and minors into their DMs, and they do sussy things. And if they're caught, then they can just make a new account. They can just, as long as they don't give any real life information, then no harm, no foul, right? And that's just not bueno, not good. It's the same thing in regards from what Joe is describing, I assume, in Christian, circles, as far as just, or any circles where people are using their Christian identities to be to lead someone else, and not really leading by example, because you don't know where Tommy Joe 505, his relationship with his church, or his anything about his real life stuff. You're just like, so if you want to preach the Bible at people you don't know on the internet, then that's probably not your place. But if you feel like it would be helpful, then you can say, hi, my advice would be, and Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong. My advice would be like, hi, I really empathize with how you read this comment, or I wouldn't even or how this hot take or whatever. I really empathize that maybe it was worded incorrectly. It personally reminds me of Bible story XYZ, and what protagonists in Bible story XYZ learned, that YZ thing, whatever, and that was helpful for me to understand the situation. And I hope, me sharing that will be helpful. So use a lot of I feel and me personally and in my opinion, because that way it's just not objectively, Jesus is the absolute. And if you have a different religion that is revolved around Jesus, then you're wrong, which happens in a lot of Christian spaces where there's not a lot of diversity, because people can talk about diversity and they can talk about the Jewish people and other religions that in online spaces, sure, but that doesn't equal experience with talking to people with diversity in real life and real practice, and how to socially do that in an acceptable manner. The other part is the harder stay in your fucking lane, frankly. So if you don't know this person, then and if you're especially not practice what you preach. It sounds like what Joe is kind of saying. Like, if you want to preach the Bible at someone, do you go to church? Do you do any of this? What is the point of this? Like, ask yourself, if it's to be helpful and to be kind, that's one thing. But if it's just to be the authoritative figure about this situation because Jesus is your buddy, your personal buddy, not anyone else's, then I'm just like, okay, you're kind of overstepping your boundaries at this point, in my opinion. Would that match your experiences, Joe, or advice, or how do you?
Yeah, again, I think that there is a place to tell people, hey, I'm right about this and you're wrong. I think that those places, certainly on the internet, those places are limited. I think that, one of the things that's really cool is one of the reasons God chose the Jews, he created the Jewish nation, cultures, and people, as he says, is to be a light to the Gentiles. And part of that was, the project was, let's create a people and that can show other people, show the goys, what it actually looks like.
You're gonna have to quote that knowledge. You might just be pulling it out of your ass. How is that part of the Christian discussion?
Well, so it's, like I say, I'll I'm getting to that. It's like, but it's okay. Is to say, by showing what it looks like to actually follow God, other people will see and say, oh, we want to imitate that.
Yeah.
And so the primary thing, that is, as God's project, is the way that people actually change is they watch you in your life and then they say, okay, I want to have what you have. How do we be like that? And so most of your witness as a Christian or as anyone is what your faith is having in your life. Again, very few people decide they want to get married because their mom is saying you should get married. Most of them decide they want to get married because they see their other friends are married and see how happy they are and say, I want some of that. Or they decide not to get married because they're like, okay, I don't want any of what I see over there. And I think that, so the most of what you're going to be doing in any space is that. Now, again, if, you have a platform where your idea is supposed to, you give your opinions on your platform, then sure, give your opinions and then people can follow you or not, But if you're entering other people's spaces it's like, then you have to earn the right to give that advice. You don't just get to say, well, I'm going to make your life harder by telling you everything you're doing wrong, when nobody knows if you actually have any credibility in this matter. Correct. So that's what I say is that first, and 90% is live by example and say, here's my experience and here's what I know, and be in your space. And then 10% is being in the spaces where you're earning the right to give the advice of how other people should live their lives based on the credibility you've gained by how you've lived your life and how you've been loving to them.
Yeah, and I think that's a good general kind of overarching discussion, is that it's frustrating because, people like going to public places to give out Bibles. That's that's well-meaning, for example,
Sure.
but that puts social pressure on the recipient to take the Bible, because if not, they feel rude. And, there's a difference between doing that versus doing that on a church-related event,
Sure.
regardless of the stance. So, that's kind of like, if it's helpful for you, great, but maybe find places in your church or in your communities where you can use that positive energy without trying to conform other people to your religion, if that makes sense. There's a time and place for
Sure,
that.
yeah.
And I think the general missionary statement, which is, well-meaning, can kind of come off as insulting another person's cultures or religions based on the
Yeah.
context. And that's a whole other can of worms of discussion.
Sure, definitely. So do you want to transition to talking about more fandom, how this applies to fandom?
Yeah. We got about a half an hour left, so good blue
Cool.
sky. So
Sounds great.
Joe, how would you say this relates to fandom spaces?
Oh, wow. What a clever segue. Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is interesting. Like, I did some research kind of a while back on the connection between, when fandom gets toxic versus when religion gets toxic. And one of the interesting aspects of consensus was that in religious spaces, faith gets toxic tends to be like what I discussed earlier. Like, are you actually having it change you, or are you using it as a weapon? But also, like, what is your idea of God? What is he actually like? What do you think about him? Changes how you behave as a religious person. For fandom, what's interesting is it tends to become toxic when people treat it like a religion, like they think it's real, where it's like, oh, and you can Google this, like all the psychological study, but it's like, oh, okay, when a writer does X with a character, if they ship these two people, together, then instead of these people that I like, they're not only just doing something interesting with a story, they're doing some harm to real people. And I think that the thing about religion and fandom is that both religion and fandom are communities that are building around values and ideas and stories. And their values, religious stories that are really deeply important to them. So, and they exist oftentimes in the online space because that's how you are able to find people who most share your values if they don't live near you. But the problem is also, again, when you have people who are deeply passionate about ideas, values, and stories, and they're interacting in a space where, like you said, they don't experience consequences for bad behavior. Or as Bill Burr says, they're never going to have to fear getting punched in the face for what they say. Then it brings out the worst in them because they can do and say what they really want to, and the consequences are going to be at least minimal. Because like you said, okay, maybe they'll be booted out of this space. They can find another space to do that, or they can find another name and then come back. Or at the very least, they've really only their online persona has been hurt. They're like their real self is. So there's some level of protection and anonymity, and that just like road rage. It's like, okay, you're in a car, you feel powerful, you're more likely to be toxic in that way. And so I think, and we can see when people don't believe that they have consequence, when they have deep passions and desires and values, and they don't think they're going to have consequences for that behavior, and they feel like the consequences of silence somehow hurts them, they behave in really bad ways. And that's where I've seen a lot of the overlap in religion and fandom happen online.
And that's kind of my experience, especially relating to my own trauma, is I'm gonna name people. I don't care at this point.
Go for it.
It's not harassment if it's public information based on a public thing, but that was a lot of my experience with dealing with loss specifically, which she seems like a nice enough person on the surface, but when the second she was having consequences for her actions, the second she was going to be outed for her behavior, she started blaming other people and screaming at other people. And it wasn't about the other people. It was the fact that she kind of lied by omission to me. This is all covered in my the one time I got canceled on the internet video. If you need the context for that, I'm not really here to promote it. It's just if you don't have any context for my trauma, because I've covered it a lot. And that just seems to be a general thing where, especially in my experience, because I've had to deal with people that gain platforms and they don't handle those platforms responsibly one way or the other. And it pisses me off because, like, regardless of being a Christian or not, I always go to the Spider-Man with great power comes great responsibility kind
Yep.
of thing. And you have to be willing to call out bad behavior in your circle. And if you're not willing to do that or even address it, then you shouldn't have a platform, frankly,
Yeah.
because you are leading by example. And if everyone is the problem but you, and if I name people that have harassed and gaslit me, then I'm the problem. That's not okay because, you know, that's like, I shouldn't have to be called the because I'm the one who's leading consequences to your actions. It just, you know, that's victim blaming at that point. And
Absolutely.
I'm speaking generally at this,
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
at this point. And it's just frustrating to see that, you know, I won't go into the deets right now because I'm one toxic person at a time in my personal life. But like, you know, with all this, you know, fan server safety reports and stuff like that. But like, I'm seeing behind the curtains of multiple content creators that are at least handling things poorly,
Mhm.
regardless of who they are. And I'm just, it makes me mad because I'm just like, I don't want to have to be the one to hold their coals in the
Yeah.
fire. But at the same time, again, multiple content creators, not speaking about anyone specifically, but at the same time, they should, like, it happens a lot in the artist community where people are working by contracts.
Mm.
And because they're working by contracts, they don't get things like healthcare or, you know, they're not being paid fairly for their time because they're working freelance by contract because that's what they're dealing with. And, you know, there's a difference between doing an indie project by contract or doing like a Team KP project for me for free versus because, you know, I don't have any money to pay people, frankly, than doing something by a big corporation, by someone who is well off financially, and you're doing something by contract for their benefit because they're the big creator and you should be blessed to have that even that opportunity to have a big platform. And I'm just like, no, they should know to pay people correctly. And, you know, if not, then it's just a whole other can of worms that I'm just like, then treat people like they're not just assets to you, and you have to treat them like with respect and not just, you know, because people can read right through that. And like, unfortunately, the thing about that woke me up about all my traumatic elements is that I think people have using me or have used me in the past as a, hey, like, we got to lead this like well because look what happened to KP, look what happened, the whole fandom turned on her because of misinformation, which is technically true. But I'm just like, yeah, but like, it's made me like not tolerate anyone's and if they have to be exposed for that, like, assuming we have credible evidence and not just like he said she said
Sure, yeah.
drama, you know, then I'm just like, I don't care, like, let's go, like, I'm done with this being acceptable. And if they have if these people have consequences for their actions, then so be it,
Yeah.
because I'm done with pretending that this stuff is okay because it hurts people regardless if it's on the internet or not, because it's hurt me regardless if it's on the internet or not. And I'm just tired of people assuming they don't have consequences for their actions because it's internet, which is dismissive and disgusting and a toxic fucking mindset. So, you know, and luckily the pony fandom, from my understanding, is kind of evening it out, and they're kind of exposing those toxic people now that time has gone past, and like the community has kind of reached its high point and kind of evening out, which is good. But I feel frustrated because I should not have had to be the catharsis for that. And by that extension, I'm not a weakened trauma bird who can't handle her own because I'm triggered. Like, I get triggered constantly, every day, all the time, forever. But that doesn't mean I'm helpless or dumb, frankly. So I know this was kind of a parade, but it just, in my experience, I just get so tired of other content creators being a content creator myself with a sizable audience, like that they think that's okay, because it's not.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's frustrating because like the other part of it too is like when it hit the fan, we did a testimony video with all the staff saying like how they felt about being on the team, and, you know, and no one had a bad thing to say and no one was forced to say anything either. But I'm just like, wow, you know, if this was all just for nothing, this was all just because some child who still works in the industry, by the way, uncomfortably, you know, wanted to project onto someone else to seem cool. And, you know, once I realized that, then I was like, oh man, this seems to happen a lot, doesn't it? Like, you know, there's a difference between being called out for bad things and having a smear campaign out of convenience to another party, especially if the evidence is shady to non-existent at best. So
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, you know, you see in these online spaces, talking with a friend of mine the other day, a lot of this in the Christian community, you have the online spaces about these, we call them the Theo Bros, where
the Theo Bros.
Yes. A lot of them are like, these Christian men who, I'm all into the Christian masculinity thing, but they're like, they're really into it, and like it's their entire personality. And you look at them and it's like, okay, like you actually get peeks into like what they look like and what it seems like their life is actually like. It's like, oh, you don't actually live up to the ideas of masculinity you actually have. And so
bro, do you even lift?
Yeah, I mean, they don't actually. And it's like, it's and it's the thing, it's like, so what you're doing is you're creating an online persona in order to fill the deficit of what you don't have in your own life. And that's what a lot of people are doing, is like, I don't have power in my own life. They did some studies. Tim Keller did a couple of articles on this about how most people who are really online a lot don't have a very happy offline life. Because of course, if they had a happy offline life, unless they like this is their profession, then of course the reason they're online is because it's their work. But other than that, if most people who are online a lot, if you had a good offline life, you wouldn't be online so much. And
right.
And it's like they have weakness, they have unsatisfactory. And so they do, but what they have is, if they're online a lot, that means they get to take up attention space. And take up attention space actually gives them kind of power, and power over other people that they don't have in their actual life. And again, because they can have a voice that they don't have in their real life online, and because these are communities that people care about, that gives them kind of power over other people that they don't really have other places. Again, if you have the connection of common values that people are very passionate about, common stories, and what's the third thing is common values, common stories, common belief, something like that, then if you can gain power in that community, you gain power over other people's loves, their values, their passions, and their beliefs, and then you have power over them. And so people do, and if it's something as trivial as something trivial as a cartoon, but it's like, just it's as again, those are really great, but it's like, oh, like I am king of the DuckTales online community. It's like, great, that's awesome, but like, whether it's as
who cares?
as trivial as that, or as, oh, I've risen in the ranks of a megachurch. People are trying to, again, going to sound super Christian here, people are trying to build their own kingdom rather than God's kingdom. And when you're trying to build your kingdom rather than God's kingdom, it means anybody who threatens your power threatens the only kingdom you have. But if you're trying to build God's kingdom, then what that means is that even if you personally lose your power, you are still contributing to a good kingdom that you have a place in.
Right.
Again, because we're talking specifically about online fandoms and online spaces, I'm kind of going in this direction, but is that people who don't feel like they have a kingdom they're a part of, that they have a place in, that they're part of the body of Christ or body of whatever it is, that's an important place. People don't have that. They try to find that online, and they haven't done the formation work of actually changing so that they get the things that they want in ways that don't harm themselves and harm others, because that only comes through real life communities.
And I think that's kind of like, not to be like, oh, I'm the good person or anything like that, but like my MO has always been, for those who are new to the podcast or anything, welcome. But my MO has always been a creator. This is our artistic platform, like an artistic outlet for me that is fun. But the contrast that people haven't gotten over the years is that, again, I am a exaggeration of my personality in real life. Like I am my character, but I'm also kind of, that's not me at face value. I don't like scream like fandom to the void at Walmart or in public or stuff like that. Like that just isn't socially acceptable, frankly, but also like that's just not who I am. And it's just, and I rant to Joe all the time because we're friends in real life, but like that was always the point with the team, is just like, I just want to make cartoon videos. Like I don't want to deal like I don't mind dealing with it. I'm happy to give people a safe space, especially if they're a victim of a bad thing, or they're ostracized, or I'm happy to do that. But at the same token, it's just like when that stuff crosses my path and it personally takes up my spoons, if we're using that mythology, or terminology, I should say. And I'm just like, man, I just want to make cartoon videos on the internet, that we're working on, but we're restructuring the team, so it's a little bit like complicated of this recording. But anyway, we're still working on content. We always will I'm not going to give up on the channel or anything, but it's just like, I just want to make cartoon videos. I don't want to deal with all this extra baggage of all this other stuff that I don't really, things I have to learn about that I didn't even think were things until people are like, oh, that's a thing. And I'm just like, but why does that have to be? Why is there even a term for this thing? And it's just like, especially with like a lot of the, people being racist online or people being misogynists online. I'm just like, I just want to make cartoon videos. I came here making My Little Pony videos. Like, you guys are grown ass adults. You should know better, kind of thing. So I think we joke about my ego a lot, in general, but I don't really have an ego, and being KP is Joe, you can testify, but like, I'm not trying to say that as a deflect, but I just, at the end of the day, I want to make cartoon videos. I seem to be good at it, and it's just hard when other things complicate the just wanting to make the cartoon videos thing, and especially when and then toxic people, just generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like you're toxic, like, what are I guess, well, Joe, what is your general, like, not to have you as a direct character witness, but like, would you say that matches your experience based on the things that, being friends for 10 years or whatever?
Look, I think in order to be an artist who self-promotes the way you have to and believes in your own work and believes in it, you have to have the ego the size of a small planet to a certain degree.
Thanks. You're really selling me here, Joe.
Look, I say this about myself too. I think I have this an ego the size of a small planet, because I'm like, look, my co-host and I and Overthinkers joke all the time, because we're like, it's like, what the world needs? Another podcast by two white guys telling people what they think about life and stuff like that. It takes a certain amount of cojones to say, like, oh, no, you shouldn't listen to other people. You should listen to me instead. But I don't see that as a criticism. I think being somebody who has a big ego that lacks empathy, can be a criticism, but that's a different thing than saying a person has a big ego. I think you do have a big ego, and I think that you also have a self-awareness, and I think you care about other people, and I think the empathy with other people, and I think and I think you also, you also look at yourself and ask, how do I be better? What might I be doing wrong? How can I be better? How can I love people better? And that's, I think, what people should be asking. And I think that a lot of times people look at somebody who has confidence when they lack it, and
I think the word is confidence that I was fishing for. I'm just like, you actually have an ego. I'm like, Joe, that wasn't what that was the opposite of what I was trying to get you to say.
No,
I'm confident. I'm confident about who I am.
You are confident. You're extremely confident, and that's a good thing. And that's and people, but you also are very open to you're also constantly self-critical, which is also a good thing, because that's how you earn your confidence. And I think people look at confidence a lot of times, and again, look, Rachel's not perfect, and I know that, and I'm not perfect. That's but
oh no, I'm not perfect. Oh no,
but,
he exposed me.
I know, it's just like, you've heard it here first, folks. But people look at people who have confidence and who have had some modicum of success. And this is, again, another thing. One of the things is that people say, if somebody is confident and successful, I have to figure out why they must be doing something wrong. Because if not, then it means there's something wrong with me if I don't have those things. And that's a really toxic thing. I'll even say, I've heard, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I've heard from enough people who, from enough Jewish content creators and friends of mine, that to me is one of the roots of anti-Semitism, because it's like, why are the Jews doing so well and I'm not? And even though we've put so many roadblocks in their place, they're still kicking all of our butts. And it's like, because they're doing something right and you're not. And you should feel maybe a little bit bad about yourself to maybe get better.
Right. Whoa, that wasn't where I was going. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just education and just access to education, which should be, it's a whole other thing. Like, but
to your point, I would say, like, again, if you are asking the question, okay, am I toxic? And it's like, and just for yourself, am I toxic? do I have toxic things? First of all, you're already on your way out. If you're asking the question, what's wrong with me? To bring it back to my boy Jesus, my King and Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
The boy.
Yes. If he said, look, take the log out of your own eye before you try to take the speck out of somebody else's. 90%, again, it's like, or as Ted Lasso said, be curious, not judgmental. Now, I don't think you should never be judgmental, but you should be curious first. And I'm not saying you should never call out somebody else for their toxic behavior, but 90% of your time should be focused on, okay, what can I be doing better to be a better person? And if you're on that journey already saying, okay, what can I do? What are my mistakes am I making? You're already ahead of 90% of all toxic people. And I think I would say, first of all, ask your friends what you could be doing better, like what people who you know and trust, what can you be doing better? What ways can you improve? And then go with the trusted ways of getting better. Again, if you are religious, be more dedicated to the rituals of your religion that are designed to help you grow and become a better person. Be further in your religious community, go to church more, go to synagogue more, whatever, if that's the thing, and go to therapy more, go work out more, go improve yourself, all the different areas in which a person can be a better person. Learn to engage further with those things, and don't be depressed, even though the more you engage with those things, the more aware of your own flaws you're going to be for a time. Again, you never feel weaker than when you're going to the gym when you start out, because you're actually getting exposed to those weaknesses. You're sore, your muscles are sore, but that's actually a sign you're getting better and improving. So don't feel bad that you're exposing your weaknesses. Feel good that you're actually growing and changing. And so that's what I would say, is just go down the path of, and be okay with the criticism people saying, okay, what's wrong with you? Like, here's, be okay with asking your friends, what are my flaws? And then having them list all of them. Because that's you weight training. That's you figuring out, okay, this is the actual process of becoming a better person. And then I will say this, you will feel worse than everybody else because you don't see everybody else's flaws and you see your own, but you will actually be so much better than 90% of the population that is not doing these things.
Right. And then I'd say, if you I think a good general point is just go to therapy, talk to your parents about therapy. Regardless, if you feel like you're on the autism spectrum, or feel like you're disabled in any way, maybe have that on do your own research about that separately, and then have that conversation about that. Because at the end of the day, if you're what the kids call terminally online, and you don't feel like you have a lot of real life friends, or feel like people that get you, then therapy is probably a good first step. But that also might be the root of bigger issues, because if you're watching a lot of cartoons at in your 20s, I do it too, I'm not shaming you, but I'm just saying that might be a cataclysm of potentially being on the spectrum. That's a whole different conversation. But therapy is a good place to start, regardless if you're religious or not. If you feel like your behavior might be isolating people, whether you mean it to or not, because if you feel uncomfortable asking those hard questions to people that you trust, which is fair, because those are hard conversations to have, then therapy might be a good, easier stepping stone than just working out at the gym for 6 hours, if we're doing the gym analogy, essentially.
Sure. Well, and I'll say this is that, we have a lot of research now that shows that being part of a real life communities is one of the most important things you can do for your mental health. Again, and so, the community and the power and the status and whatever that you're trying to find online, you won't find it. It's almost like, you might be able to find some friends that you can take offline and build those relationships with, and that's great. But every single generation since the silent generation has been more depressed and anxious than the one before. And that's even with all of the social improvements that we've made against racism and sexism, and all of the wider acceptance of therapy than we've ever had before, even with all that. And the reason is because we aren't in the kind of tight-knit real life relationships we used to have. And we're going away from those further and further as a society. And so I think
COVID didn't help, not to interrupt, but COVID didn't help.
Sure, that sped up the process. But again, it's been each generation prior to that was happening. But yeah, we are more online and less in real life than we are before. And so I would say one of the things to ask yourself, if you don't think you're toxic, ask yourself, how online are you, and how offline in your relationships are you? And maybe say, okay, I'm actually going to have to put in the work of making myself more offline than online, and then see, again, therapy is good, but like make sure that whatever you're doing, your offline life is a life of more flourishing than it is your online life, because we know that is going to make you happier than you are right now if you are online too much.
Right. And then, if the good thing about therapy stuff is there's also group therapy. So you can meet people through group therapy that might be going through similar struggles. But the other part of it too is they might, like, conventions are always there, regardless if I'm going or not. It's not about me. But like, if you feel like you're best in a community where you can cosplay or you can go like, get excited about panels or something, like those opportunities are there too, if you feel like you feel comfortable seeking them out.
Yeah. And find ones in your area, because then you might actually be able to make friends that you don't have to just see at conventions.
Right. And the alternative too is that if you feel like your online friends can become real life friends, but you have to meet them first. And
you have to bring them offline. Yes.
Yeah, a convention is a great place to meet your online friends in an environment that is safe, so they don't turn out to be serial killers, which is,
thing. Yes.
I've been doing pony cons for a long time and general cons for a longer time, all of them combined, and usually that is the minority. And if so I don't want to say just trust people blindly, but just be careful and, lead with an air of caution. But, that is socially acceptable if people split rooms at conventions, or people split hotel rooms at conventions to be able to afford to go to the convention. Yeah. That is part of the culture. And as long as all parties are consenting adults, usually nothing bad, in my experience, nothing bad happens in there besides sleeping, unless that is a preconditioned. Anyway, as long as your boundaries are met, saying, hey, I'm just here for the convention and to sleep and vibe and hang out with my friends, then, I think that's
be clear about your expectations. Yes.
Correct. Yeah. Without getting into the nitty gritty of it. And then parents, if you're listening, then conventions are also a great way to meet people, but parental supervision probably wouldn't hurt. Like if you and your 16-year-old have an online friend that they want to meet at a convention, maybe just supervise.
If they're underage, definitely advise the parents to go with them at least the first couple times.
Yeah. So because that's a whole different can of worms.
Other thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I think thanks for the discussion, Joe. Hopefully we can help some people become less toxic. Whoa.
Yeah, hopefully this has been helpful for people, who want to become less toxic and who want to be able to observe and understand other people and how to recognize and avoid people who are toxic or hold them accountable. Hopefully it's just giving you an education on this.
Yeah. Regardless if you're Christian or not. If you're not Christian and you're not, hopefully it was at least entertaining.
And maybe you can understand better, how to tell, your Christian friends or the Christians, recognize, where, this is why they're being toxic, or this is where it's coming from. And this is how to recognize somebody who's not, or somebody who means well versus somebody who doesn't mean well. Hopefully it's helpful in that regard as well.
Right. So I think we can wrap, if that's cool with you. Where can people find you, and or when am I going to be on your podcast? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
People can find me on my website, josephholmesstudios.com. They can also find the podcast, wherever Overthinkers podcast, wherever podcasts are available. Also at the overthinkersjournal.world. They can also find my culture criticism, my film criticism at religionunplugged.com. And since you didn't ask me any other questions, I will leave it there.
Okay, well, do you have anything you'd like to say to the audience of like whatever people watch listen to the podcast? I don't know. It's kind of a gamble every episode.
Yeah, I have to say, look, I appreciate you guys trying to engage with how to be better people and how to love what you love in a way that loves yourself and loves others in the way that you ought to. And I would love if you found what we were saying interesting. I'd love for you to check out my stuff, but also just good on you for trying to be a non-toxic presence in a often toxic world.
That is valid AF. But okay, I guess I'll wrap for me. So, well, I hope this episode I hope I get some of your people over here, because I think they might be interested in this conversation. You got a podcast award, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, we got a
Whoa.
podcast, the Content Christian Media Conference Award for Best Podcast, which
Whoa.
I have to say, very well deserved. Not to, I say this with total lack of bias. They made the right choice. But no, we're really grateful. Really grateful. And it's really, it's so exciting.
So anyway, if you're new to me, hi, I'm, like I said at the beginning, I'm I Love Kim Possible a Lot, KP for short, Rachel, if I know you, or frankly at this point, because sometimes people will use that as a like, oh, I know her real name. I'm just like, I don't know you. Like, what are you doing? I have a YouTube channel's vibing. We're working on content, but we're probably going to be backed up for like a month of this recording. I'm pretty active on the Twitter, even though Elon Musk is kind of being an idiot. So I'm still probably be there for a hot minute until something goes wrong. So Twitter, I do art commissions. If you want to pay me money for art, I do art. I have a minor in studio art, so I do the good art. Let's see. My biggest thing right now is my Discord community. So hello, if you like free things, we have a free community Discord. It's called I Love Kim Possible a Lot fan server. That's all it's called right now. It's in my LinkedIn. I promote it all the time on my Twitter. It's on the about page of my YouTube. It's out there. It's a public and free server, and we host free games and movies there every night at this point, including hosting the premiere of Rick and Morty via Sling. So that will be a live premiere, which so if you want to watch it for free, you can. So that's been where the majority of my attention has been over the last month, is optimizing the Discord server, which I'm very happy with. So and obviously I'm pretty adamant about that being a non-toxic space. So if you have any incidents that make you feel uncomfortable, please talk to a mod. We're happy to kick people out for being icky with proof and validation. If there's not proof, we'll keep an eye out. So it is a safe place. I have pretty high trauma, so if you have the trauma, then it's a safe space where we have group support sessions too. So if you want just a place to vibe and meet friends, then I can't recommend that. I love people in there, as and I like having a safe space that I can interact with people that enjoy the content and the channel and the work that we do. So, and making friends regardless of me. I'm going to trick everyone to making friends with each other. So speaking of non-toxicity, if you'd like to be friends with other people on the internet, then go there. It's free. I think and then this is episode 90. So the podcast is called Animation Communication. If you liked it, then we have a bunch in the backlog already. So including a couple episodes with Joe in the past that I mentioned at the beginning. But yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time on the podcast. I'm sure Joe will be back regardless, because it's convenient.
I like attention.
You like attention too. Okay. Good boy. Here's your treat. Yeah. And yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Animation Communication.
Woo!
Cue outro. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Animation Communication on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting provider. We are really hoping the show makes a difference in how people view animation, as well as media as a whole, as well as giving and providing advice for people all over the world who like and want to join the animation and media industry. If you like what you heard, please remember to show support by giving a like, a follow, rating those 5 stars, as well as subscribing to our main I Love Kim Possible a Lot channel on YouTube, and turn your notifications on. New episodes of Animation Communication come out every Wednesday at 6 a.m. EST on podcasting platforms and 4 p.m. EST on YouTube. You can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at the KP Podcast for information on upcoming guest episodes and more, as well as our hosts KP and Lyle Convoy at I Love KP a Lot and at Lyle Manbad on social media. I'm Lucy, and thank you for being a part of our community. See you next time on Animation Communication.